boy, am I excited today. And you should too, because you have the honor to witness the first ever multi-part video series that I plan on doing on this channel. I have been planning this for over a year. A video series entitled The Golden Year of Fighting Games. So in case you guys didn't know, we are actually living in a golden year of fighting games. For the first time in video game history, the big three fighting games all had a game release within 365 days of one another. Within one single year, we got one of each: Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, and Tekken. Surprisingly, that has never happened before, so golden year fighting games. And to celebrate this momentous occasion, I have decided to do a 10-part video series on said titles. Well, as of right now, it's 10 parts. Might be more. Who knows? That's what we do here at Rouga Rabid's channel. We just throw shit at the wall to see what sticks. It is a very improvisational video making style. So what does this video series entail, you might be asking? Well, obviously, we're going to take these three series and pit them up against each other to see which one's the best. What the hell else are you going to do with fighting games? Competition is kind of the whole fucking point. But we're not going to have them compete in all that nonsense that fighting game fans don't care about, like gameplay. What are you, a fucking nerd? Here we're going to be talking about things that really matter. We're going to be pitting these three against each other on things like who has the best story, best heroes, best villains, best rivalries, to see which of these three games have done the non-gameplay portions of their game the best. So this is how it's going to work. Every video that comes out is going to compare one particular aspect of all three games to each other. Then at the end of that video, each will be ranked from best to worst, and they will be given a certain amount of points based on that. First place gets 2 points, second place gets 1 point, and last place gets 0 points. And then at the end of the series, we're going to add all these points up to see which one is actually the best. So pick a series and place your bets, ladies and gentlemen, because this is about to be some rad shit. Let's get started. So for part 1, I thought I'd keep it pretty simple and talk about the protagonists of each series. But I very quickly realized just how wrong I was. All three of these series have multiple protagonists, some of them an absurd amount. Like, goddamn. And we're going to talk about that one right now with Mortal Kombat. So this one was far more difficult than I thought it would be because Mortal Kombat has a whole lot of protagonists. Just looking at the series from afar, you'd think it's just Liu Kang, you know, maybe Johnny Cage in a couple of games. No, it's way more complicated than that. Mortal Kombat consists of 3 eras: the original era, the 3D era, and the NetherRealm era. And while Liu Kang is the protagonist of most games within the original era, after that it's kind of just up in the air. The 3D era decided to do the unthinkable and murder their protagonist in the first fucking game, and then just have a bunch of rando protagonists for the entirety of that era. Every single game was about a brand new character that you'd never heard of before and never will again. The series just forgot about all of them right afterwards. We're talking about characters like Shujinko from Deception or Taven from Armageddon. These characters were very, very forgettable. They didn't really have much going on, and the little bit they did have wasn't really expanded in the games that they took place in. If they had stuck around and more in the series, maybe they could help Mortal Kombat a little more in this competition, but as is, they're all very forgettable. I mean, shit, at the end of Armageddon, Taven straight up defeats Blaze and is the only survivor in the massive war between all the characters of Mortal Kombat. And then when Mortal Kombat 9 starts, they just completely forget that Taven and Blaze even existed and completely retcon the entire plot of that game to have never happened. And Mortal Kombat does this a lot throughout the entirety of the 3D era. During the start of the NetherRealm era, which is Mortal Kombat 9, they bring Liu Kang back and decide to make him the main character once again before killing him off again in the first game of the era. Again? What the fuck? Before replacing him with Johnny Cage, to then have Johnny Cage replaced with Cassie Cage, to then have Cassie Cage be not really that relevant for the next few games. I'm seeing a pattern here. Alright, hold up. So to summarize so far, Mortal Kombat has like 10 fucking protagonists, and out of those 10 protagonists, about 8 of them can be completely forgotten because they're not really focused on at all. And the ones that are focused on afterwards just become side characters and become less relevant in the series. The only 2 that actually stick around and are important to the series are Liu Kang and Johnny Cage. So let's focus in on them a little bit. Liu Kang is a piece of shit protagonist. He is probably the worst, most popular video game protagonist of all time. Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes sense. On top of being one of the most boring characters to ever be invented, there's really not a whole lot to him. He's just generic good guy who always does the right thing and wants to protect the world and was chosen from a very young age to do so. That's it. There really isn't a whole lot more to his character. Maybe they'd be able to expand on his character a little bit and make it more interesting, but they're just too busy killing him the fuck off all the time. He has been murdered and turned into an evil zombie twice in the same game series. That is unusual to say the least. And you can't give him any sort of characterization or development at this point because he's under mind control by some evil sorcerer the whole time. It's not really him. They do try to add a little bit in the NetherRealm games by giving him this idea where he's completely 100% loyal to Raiden before becoming disillusioned with him and then slowly becoming his own character throughout the course of Mortal Kombat 9. But again, they kill him off before we get to see what this development even means for his character. When they finally do bring him back again in Mortal Kombat 11, he goes back to being generic hero with nothing really interesting going on. And honestly, I have no idea why they chose this character to be the protagonist of their franchise throughout the majority of the series. There's really nothing here to get all excited about. Unlike Johnny Cage. Johnny Cage is a legitimately good character. I would know. I made an entire character analysis about him. His arc throughout the series is absolutely fantastic. If you want to see me go into more depth about it, go check out that video, because I'm not going to repeat everything I said there here. But for the purposes of this video, I will say he's tremendously underutilized. I mean, Johnny Cage is only the main character in Mortal Kombat X for like half the game before Cassie Cage takes over. And then he has a couple hours of focus in Mortal Kombat 11 that are really good. But that's about it. The game doesn't really focus on him all that much, because the protagonists of the NetherRealm era games really suffer from them having to jump back and forth between 20 different characters. So nobody really gets fleshed out the way they should. So this leaves the Mortal Kombat series with a ridiculously high number of protagonists, none of which are fleshed out properly, most of which are boring, and one pretty solid one with almost no screen time. The writers of this game had absolutely no business not making Johnny Cage the main protagonist of the entire series from the beginning. They made a very dumb decision by sticking with Liu Kang of all people. I mean, in the world of fighting games, who is more generic than the Bruce Lee inspired character? I would have a harder time thinking of fighting games that don't have Bruce Lee inspired characters than ones that do. That's how common they are. This series is really lacking on its protagonists. But I would say this dead horse is sufficiently beaten, so let's continue on to Street Fighter. So I'm not sure how much of a secret this is, but I really don't like Capcom. It is easily my least favorite video game company. I know for a lot of people it's Bethesda or EA or 2K or whatever. Nope, for me it's Capcom. Fucking hate these people. And the sad part is that it really doesn't have to be this way, because Capcom has some very talented designers and developers, but they just cannot help but constantly shoot themselves in their own fucking foot. And Street Fighter is no exception. And because of this insistence on metaphorical self-mutilation, they continue to shit on the concept of protagonists within the Street Fighter franchise. So let's go through the offenses, shall we? Street Fighter 1 comes out. Good game, everybody likes it. Nobody knows who the fucking protagonist is. Why? Because Capcom didn't choose a protagonist. It had a bunch of different characters from a bunch of different countries, and then they marketed different protagonists to different countries based on who they thought it would appeal to the most. Because they're whores, you see. But pretty much everybody in the entire world agreed that Ryu was the best character and was the protagonist of the series, regardless of who they marketed. So for Street Fighter 2, they actually chose Ryu as the official protagonist. So we're good. Problem solved, right? No. Because instead of riding that victory train all the way to bank, they decided to re-release Street Fighter 2 like 7 goddamn times. Fucking Capcom. Anyway, eventually people got tired of being ripped off buying the same game over and over again, and sales for Super Ultra Street Fighter 2, The Dawn of Ryu Part 7 Collector's Edition just didn't sell all that well. This made them release Street Fighter 3. But obviously, since people got tired of playing Street Fighter 2 over and over again, it must be because of the protagonist, Capcom thought. So let's trade out that shitty old Ryu protagonist for a whole new guy. Who's big right now? Hulk Hogan? Fucking put him in the game, and we'll call him Alex. And it sold perfectly adequately. And then they released it 2 more times. Alright. So they decided to move on again. Okay, Alex wasn't working. Let's go back to Ryu. Street Fighter 4 comes out. It blows everybody's fucking minds. Everyone loves Street Fighter 4. Took the entire fighting game community by storm. And then they released it again, and again, and again, and again. I know I made this joke already for Mortal Kombat, but is anyone starting to see a pattern here? Anyway, flash forward past a couple of disappointing games, and we arrive at Street Fighter 6, where Capcom is talking about yet a new protagonist because Street Fighter 5 didn't sell particularly well. It's got nothing to do with the fact that Street Fighter 5 is a barren wasteland of a game with practically no content to speak of. No, clearly it's this asshole's fault. Basically what I'm getting to is Capcom is a vicious, bitter crack whore of an ex-wife. It doesn't matter to her that you're already paying the alimony payments. She wants as much from you as humanly possible. They're constantly trying to reinvent the game, with quotations, every time one of their shitty games doesn't sell well, because they have really shitty practices. And because of this, the Street Fighter timeline is all over the fucking place. And we've had 3 protagonists in this series, 2 of which are god-awful. Fucking Capcom. And honestly, it's getting to the point where I don't even think Capcom knows what a fucking protagonist is. They say that Luke is the protagonist of Street Fighter 6, but I've played that game. No, the fuck he isn't. This fucking goober is. And he's even worse than Luke. Fucking Capcom. So saying all this, how is Street Fighter done with its protagonists? Pretty good. actually. I mean, don't get me wrong, Alex and Luke are boring as shit, but Ryu is actually a genuinely good protagonist. And I don't just say good for a fighting game, he's actually pretty well done and consistently written throughout the entire series. Surprising, I know. Some people might say that he suffers from generic character syndrome, where basically his character is just a bunch of different story tropes all packed into one person, which is true, but I'd be lying if I said that what comes out on the end after all those tropes are applied is not a properly done character. While it's true that Ryu's character is essentially an amalgamation of a bunch of different other characters like Luke Skywalker, Kenshiro, Goku, and countless others, that doesn't necessarily make him bad. The story that's told around him is relatively competently done. His goals, desires, and character arcs are all clearly represented, and he's very interesting. I like the idea that the main character of Street Fighter isn't actually good or evil. He's just this very driven person who has one goal and goes for it no matter what, and that many heroic characters within the series actually see Ryu as being kind of evil and a dick. The type of person who's willing to work for mob bosses and other evil characters as long as it gets him to his goal of becoming the ultimate fighter. But he's also considered a hero by a lot of the roster because a lot of times the people that start problems with him are bad guys. While it has been done before in other stories, it's still an interesting template for a character. He's a simple enough character that the writers can write simple stories around him to follow, while having just enough depth that he remains interesting, unlike Liu Kang. And this is something that both Luke and Alex were missing. They were both very simple characters as well, but they didn't have that extra layer of complexity like he does. And as much as I hate Capcom and I give Street Fighter a lot of shit, I have to admit, Ryu is a solid protagonist for this series. If only they would stop turning their fucking back on him every time their shitty game doesn't sell well. Now for the moment you've all been waiting for. The Tekken guy is about to talk about Tekken again. Okay. I suppose you think because I make so many Tekken videos I must be biased, and I will use my bias to give Tekken all the points. Well, sorry sir and or madam, you are mistaken. I have never held back when it comes to the Tekken bashing, and that's not going to change anytime soon. Having said that, there are quite a few things that Tekken does do better than both Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat when it comes to their protagonists. For one, it shows a lot more respect to its protagonists. Despite having more than one throughout the series, Tekken has 4. Each and every single one of those protagonists stay relevant throughout the entire series, even the ones that they're not the protagonists of, which is something wholly unique to Tekken that Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat just straight up doesn't do. The protagonist of the series as a whole is essentially the Mishimas. It's a story of multiple generations of men within the same family trying to kill each other, and every single game focuses on a different aspect of this, to various degrees of success. This gives the protagonist of Tekken quite a few advantages over the other two series. For one, the shifting from one protagonist to another in between games feels far more natural, in a way that the others don't. It all feels like it's progressing the overall story. And the 3 main Mishimas on their own are actually very interesting. Heihachi, Kazuya, and Jin are all interesting characters with an engaging story that pushes them along, and Heihachi in particular is a genuinely great protagonist character. Having said that, there's some very serious issues here. I've said this in past videos and I will probably continue to say this in future videos. A lot of the stories in Tekken are written in crayon. They're an absolute clusterfuck. Jin in particular suffers quite a bit from this, and I go into great detail in my Is Jin a Good Character video. But the basic summary that I make there is that while Jin is a very good character concept, he's executed extremely poorly. Most of his character development is done off screen. A lot of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He goes in very strange directions without the build up to push him into those directions. It's just kind of a mess. Unlike Liu Kang and Ryu, Jin is a very complex character with a lot of depth and very complex reasons for doing the things he wants to do. But the very simple stories that they put him in do not properly explore his character at all. And for the vast majority of the series, at best, he's a wasted potential character. Now in 8, they do try to correct this and the story is significantly better written. The problem is that how they accomplish this is by stripping all of that complexity from him and making him a far more simple and generic character. Tekken 8 essentially gets rid of all of the most interesting things about him. And what we're left with is a pretty dull character overall. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's still way better than Liu Kang, but he's nowhere near someone like Ryu or Johnny Cage. Kazuya's done quite a bit better. Unlike Jin, he's not as complex. His motivations and goals are far more simple and require a much simpler explanation than Jin's would, and he's very enjoyable to watch when he's on screen. The issue with Kazuya is that they don't really focus on him that much. The entire story of the Mishima Saga is following the story of Kazuya trying to kill Heihachi from 1 to 7, and his story throughout that whole time never shifts away from it. The problem is that they keep squeezing other smaller, less interesting stories into the forefront of the games, creating this weird A plot, B plot thing where neither of the two plots connect in any way, and Kazuya's character does suffer because of this. You end up playing like 3 games in a row where it seems like Kazuya doesn't get anywhere on his goals, despite the fact that he has a decent amount of screen time. His story, and by extension his character, is is essentially frozen in place for that time period. And while they do get back to his story in 7 and 8, he isn't nearly as interesting in either of those two games as he was in, say, Tekken 4. You see, Kazuya as a character is just pure evil. His goal in life is absolute and complete world domination. He's basically if you put Cobra Commander into a video game. The only thing interesting about that motivation is that it was given to a protagonist. That's the unusual part. So if his motivations are dull and boring, what makes him interesting? And I think I narrowed it down. Kazuya is interesting when he loses. I think the reason why people love Kazuya, despite him being pretty simple as a character, is because he's kind of written like a shonen anime protagonist. Kazuya's will and determination for world domination is unmatched by anyone else in the series. Like, his willpower is greater than Heihachi's and Jin's combined. Despite this, he constantly loses. He gets beaten by Jin in almost every fight they have. He gets beaten by Heihachi in almost every fight they have. He only has a couple of victories in the entire series. But the fact that he keeps losing, never gives up, comes back stronger, and fights again and again is what I personally believe has given so many people such love for his character. I think it's the same effect a lot of people have for Vegeta. Vegeta, like Kazuya, just keeps losing over and over again, and we know he's never going to beat Goku. But the fact that he pushes forward, the fact that he has this ambition that he will not let go, the fact that he is willing to try again and again and again, no matter how many times he fails, makes you kind of like him and root for him, despite the fact that he's clearly in the wrong. Kazuya has sort of a similar situation going on. And after Tekken 7, while Kazuya is clearly the most powerful character in the entire series, even more powerful than Jin, without that constant drive and ambition having to overcome all of these failures, now he is at the top of the series, he's kind of not as interesting. And I don't believe that that game gave him an interesting enough story or dialogue or any really good character moments to overcome that part of his character that we lost. Kazuya was very disappointing in 8, and Kazuya hasn't been a really solid character since 4. Then there's Heihachi, and Heihachi is one of the great villains of gaming. I made an entire character analysis on this guy. He's fascinating, he's interesting, he's entertaining to watch, he has every aspect you would want in a character. If the question of this video is who would be my favorite protagonist, Heihachi would be there. He would be the #1 guy. The problem is that Heihachi is not really the protagonist all that often. He's only been the protagonist in 2 games, and while he is great in those games and throughout the series, it's a series of 8 games where 6 of them he's not the protagonist. Out of the 3 main protagonists of Jin, Kazuya, and Heihachi, Heihachi has the least amount of screen time and the least focus throughout. So while out of all of the protagonists that I've talked about in this series so far, Heihachi is up there as, if not #1, #2. It would just seem very strange to me to put that much weight on his role as protagonist when he barely is one, and the 2 characters that are protagonists throughout the majority of the series have so many problems. Oh, and Lars is fine. He's kind of boring in the game where he's the protagonist, and he gets better afterwards when he becomes a side character. I basically put him in the same category that I put Taven and Alex. He just sort of exists. He doesn't really move the slider for Tekken up or down. So, now that we've been through all 3 series, what's the order? Who comes in first? Who comes in last? Honestly, this was not a hard decision to come to. Only one of these series has a consistently good protagonist, and that's Street Fighter. Tekken has Heihachi, who's amazing, but he's an antagonist far more often than he's a protagonist. The main protagonists of the series are mostly shared between Jin and Kazuya, and both of them are very mixed bags. Sometimes they're written really great, and sometimes they're written very poorly. And last place is Mortal Kombat. Liu Kang is a terribly boring character. Other than him just being a nice, good guy, there is nothing interesting about him. And filling up your roster with a bunch of one-off bullshit protagonists did not help the situation. Johnny Cage is a great character and would have put Mortal Kombat higher up in the running, but the problem is that he's barely the protagonist. You can't even really say that he's a protagonist at 10 because he has to share it with Cassie Cage. So that's it. Let's tally up the points. Street Fighter gets 2 points, Tekken gets 1 point, and Mortal Kombat sadly gets no points. You know, I noticed something for the first time making this video. Each of the protagonists of the big 3 fighting games all cover a different section of the morality meter. The protagonists in Mortal Kombat are inherently good, the protagonists of Street Fighter are inherently neutral, and the protagonists of Tekken are inherently evil. That doesn't really mean anything for the video. It's not good or bad. I just found it interesting. Anyway, that's going to be it for me today. Make sure to look out for part 2 in this series because it'll be coming shortly. So remember to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon. Remember, you're not going to get notifications if you don't hit the bell icon. And y'all be safe out there, you hear?